At the most important family meeting of the year, Dante Moretti ordered his plus-size assistant, Evelyn Hart, to stand before 20 armed men. Then he dropped her confidential employment file onto the table and announced that she was fired for accessing his late father's private archive. Evelyn accepted the humiliation without defending herself. Even when Dante accused her of stealing from the family that had protected her for 6 years, she had until midnight to leave New York or be treated as an enemy. But as security dragged her toward the door, the family attorney arrived, carrying the final page of Vittorio Moretti's sealed will. Evelyn's name appeared above every biological heiress, beside an inheritance no outsider should have known existed. Stranger still, the signature had been witnessed 3 years before she began working for the family. Dante stared at the woman he had just condemned. Evelyn met his cold eyes and whispered, "Your father didn't hire me to assist you. He sent me to keep you alive." Rain lined the council room windows. Evelyn Hart stood between 2 guards in a navy wrap dress, following her soft, full figure, chestnut curls loose around her round face, across the table. 32-year-old Dante Moretti remained still, black and grey neck ink visible above his open collar and one tat hand beside her employment file. Everybody out except family. "Counsel and Miss Hart," Dante said. His captains hesitated. Marco Moretti, Vittorio's younger brother, did not. "You fired her in front of this council. She leaves in front of this council." The family attorney, Samuel Green, set the sealed will on the table. He was 70 and breathing hard from his climb up the mansion stairs. Vittorio anticipated that objection. Samuel read the clause aloud. If Evelyn were dismissed or accused within 60 days of Vittorio's death, she would control the Bellwether Trust until the succession review ended. The trust held 3 warehouses, 2 shipping contracts, and a voting proxy that decided who commanded Brooklyn territory. She could certify the successor or suspend the transfer if the heir faced coercion or concealed danger. Marco laughed once. "A secretary decides who becomes Don, an executive assistant." Evelyn corrected quietly. "No, I decide whether the review is safe enough to proceed." Dante's gaze sharpened. 6 years beside him had taught Evelyn every degree of that expression. This was not surprise, it was injury held behind discipline. He had trusted her with his calendar, his private entrances, the names of men who owed him blood, and the medications his mother refused to admit she needed. Yet she had known that his father had placed a hand on the family's succession and said nothing. "When did he tell you?" Dante asked. "He didn't tell me about the will, but he gave you a task." "Yes," Marco leaned forward. "Then she admits conspiracy." Evelyn looked at Samuel, who gave the smallest nod. The old lawyer removed a brass key from the envelope. It opened Archive Room 3, the room Evelyn had entered at 2:13 that morning, using credentials Dante believed she had stolen. Vittorio had given her the key 6 years earlier, with one instruction. If he died and the West Warehouse changed its night inventory procedure, she was to retrieve the red ledger and compare the first and last pages. "The procedure changed yesterday," Evelyn said. "I went to the archive. The ledger was gone." Dante turned toward Nico Russo, his security chief. Nico was broad, graying, and loyal enough to have carried Dante out of a burning car. "When Dante was 19, you told me." The motion record showed her entering with a copied master credential. "It did," Nico said. The system logged the master credential. Evelyn placed the brass key on the table. The archive door still has a mechanical cylinder behind the electronic plate. Vittorio never trusted a system he could not open during a blackout. "I used this," somebody wanted the record to say. "I used Dante's credential." That fact did not prove her innocent. It proved only that the official record had been created by someone with access to the house security system. Marco immediately understood the distinction. "Convenient," he said. The ledger vanishes, and she produces an antique key. Samuel turned over the envelope. Vittorio's signature ran across its flap, and the wax beneath it remained unbroken. Until minutes earlier, the key had been sealed inside. Dante rose. His height and muscular frame changed the room's balance, but his voice remained low. "Where were you between 2:30 and 5? Evelyn's throat tightened. At 3, she had followed Vittorio's second instruction to a church basement in Red Hook. where an aging dock foreman named Luis Ortega had waited with a warning, revealing Luis before she could move his family would sign his death warrant. I can't answer, yet pain flickered in Dante's eyes. Gone before anyone else could name it. You ask me to disregard a security record, a missing ledger, and 3 hours you refuse to explain. I'm asking for 12 hours. Keep me here if you must. But shut the West Warehouse and do not allow tonight's transfer. Marco struck the table. That transfer pays the Belandi debt. Stop it, and we break a blood agreement. The Morettis owed the Belandis 12 sealed crates under a truce. Cancelling delivery could restart war. Allowing it might carry Vittorio's evidence beyond recovery. Dante walked around the table until he stood close enough for Evelyn to smell rain on his coat. Once, 2 winters earlier, he had kissed her in an elevator after she had stitched a cut above his ribs. They had stopped before desire became a promise neither could safely keep. Since then, their intimacy had lived in restrained glances and the private fact that she was the only person who knew he could not sleep with a door behind him. 6 years, he said, too softly for the council. You could have trusted me once. Your father trusted the wrong person once. That's why he made me wait. Dante's jaw tightened. Then he faced the room. The transfer is delayed until sunrise. Evelyn remains in the East Guest suite under guard. Nobody enters without my permission. Marco's expression cooled. The Belandis will treat that as an insult. Then I'll receive their insult personally. As Nico escorted Evelyn into the corridor, the lights went out. A gunshot cracked from the council room. Emergency lamps flooded the hall red. Evelyn turned back and saw Samuel Green collapse beside the open will while a dark figure escaped through the service door, carrying the envelope that had held Vittorio's key. Dante reached Samuel before the second emergency lamp came alive. The bullet had passed through the lawyer's upper arm and shattered the glass cabinet behind him. Blood spread across his sleeve. Alarming but not immediately fatal. Nico sealed the floor and called Dr. Lena Park, the discreet trauma physician retained by the family. Evelyn pressed a folded linen napkin above Samuel's wound while Dante searched the council room with a pistol held low. Service door was supposed to be locked, he said. It was inspected at 6. Nico answered. Then the shooter had access after 6. Marco stood beside the table, furious that suspicion had entered a room containing his sons and captains, or the woman planned a distraction. Evelyn kept pressure on Samuel's arm. I was in the corridor between 2 guards. Plans can have accomplices. Dante's eyes moved from Marco to the missing envelope. Whoever fired had ignored the will, the brass key, and Samuel's briefcase. They had taken only the paper bearing Vittorio handwritten notation of when and where the envelope had been prepared. Evelyn understood why. The notation named St. Bridget's Church, the same place she had visited before dawn. Samuel gripped her wrist. My office copy, he whispered. Bank vault. Tomorrow at 10. Marco heard him. What copy? A routine duplicate, Samuel said, recovering his professional caution. Dr. Park arrived through the east entrance. While she treated Samuel, Dante ordered everyone searched. No weapon appeared. The service stair camera had frozen for 43 seconds, and rain erased the exterior footprints. Dante took Evelyn to the library rather than the guest suite. He dismissed the guards to the far side of the door and set Vittorio's key on the desk between them. Tell me enough to keep Samuel alive, he said. The stolen envelope could lead them to St. Bridget's. A man named Luis Ortega met me there at 3. He supervised the West Warehouse night crews for 22 years. Why did you bring him here? Because your Uncle S. driver followed me from the archive. Dante's expression did not change, but his tattooed fingers closed around the desk edge. You saw Carlo. I saw Marco's grey sedan. I didn't see the driver. I doubled back through the delivery streets and reached the church on foot. Luis told me the new inventory procedure lets sealed crates bypass the Moretti count and move under Belandi tags. He believed somebody was using the truce shipment to transfer weapons and cash that belonged to your captains. Believed he had copied loading tallies, but he would give them only to you. His wife and grandson were being moved first. Dante picked up his phone. Evelyn stopped him with one hand over the screen. The contact startled them both. Beneath his cuff, ink curved across the back of his hand. Beneath hers, his pulse beat hard. If we call the church from a family line, We tell the shooter where Lewis is. You think my communications are compromised. I think somebody knew I used the archive, knew Samuel's envelope mattered, and controlled a camera inside this house. Dante removed the battery from the desk phone's wireless base and opened a drawer containing a simple prepaid handset. Evelyn had placed it there 4 years earlier after a federal raid interrupted every family network. He remembered they called Lewis' number. A woman answered, crying. Lewis had left the church when Evelyn did, but he had never reached the apartment where his family waited. 10 minutes earlier, someone had sent her a photograph of him kneeling inside the West warehouse. The message demanded that the Sunrise transfer proceed unchanged. Dante showed no outward shock. Send the photograph to this number. The image showed the yellow rail and painted column of loading lane 14, a north side area closed after a sprinkler collapse and accessible only to maintenance. He called Nico on the prepaid phone and ordered 2 loyal men to verify the lane from the river roof without entering. Nico did not question why Dante avoided normal channels. Evelyn studied the photograph. Lewis' shirt was dry despite the rain, suggesting he had been inside before the storm intensified. A clock mounted behind him showed 9:20, but the message was recent. The captors had prepared the leverage before the council meeting. Her dismissal had not caused the kidnapping. It had been anticipated. They knew Vittorio's will would trigger if you fired me, she said. Then somebody knew the clause, Samuel, Vittorio, the witnesses, and whoever searched the archive before me. Dante's phone vibrated with Nico's report. Lane 14 was lit. A van stood inside, but the roof observers could not see Lewis. More important, 12 men wearing Belandi colors were assembling outside the main gate, 2 hours before the agreed transfer. If I raid the lane, they kill him and claim I attacked the Belandis, Dante said. If I allow the shipment, whatever Vittorio documented disappears. Evelyn looked at the storm beating against the library windows. Her skill was not combat. For 6 years, she had coordinated Dante's impossible schedules, negotiated access between proud men, and noticed when routine concealed intention. We make them believe the transfer is proceeding. But we change who verifies the seals. Marco controls the warehouse captains, not all of them. Your father made the night cafeteria an independent contractor after the strike. Its delivery van enters every lane without a family escort. Dante understood. Evelyn had found not a secret tunnel but an ordinary access route, created by her own work. They would enter dressed as catering staff, reach Lewis, and photograph the crates before the Belandis arrived. Nico would control the gate only after Dante confirmed the hostage was alive. You stay here, Dante said. Lewis trusted me. He may refuse to move if strangers appear. This is not a calendar problem. No, it's the consequence of a promise I made your father. He held her gaze for a long moment. If I take you, you follow my order when the shooting starts. If shooting starts, our plan has already failed. 20 minutes later, they left through the kitchen dock in a white cafeteria van. Evelyn wore a borrowed raincoat over her navy dress. Dante had changed into a dark maintenance jacket that covered most of his tattoos. At 11:47 p.m., as the van approached the West warehouse, the dashboard radio crackled on by itself. Marco's voice filled the cab. Bring Evelyn to lane 14. Dante, come alone, or Luis dies before you reach the door. Dante did not touch the brake. The cafeteria van continued through the rain at the same careful speed while Marco's voice repeated the order. Evelyn looked beneath the dashboard and found a family band receiver taped behind the fuse panel. The device could transmit but not listen. It had been planted to make them feel watched and to force Dante into a visible response. He guessed the van, she said. He doesn't know who is inside. Marco knew your access route. His office approved the cafeteria contract before you took over. He knows the route exists. Dante drove past the west gate without turning in the side mirror. 2 Belandi guards stepped into the road, then lowered their weapons when the van kept moving toward the commercial bakery next door. Dante parked behind the bakery's loading dock, cut the lights, and called Nico from the prepaid phone. Nico had found the breach. The cafeteria dispatcher, frightened by a threat against her son, had told Marco's man that Dante requested the van. She had not known who would ride inside. Nico moved her family to safety and sent a second empty cafeteria van toward the warehouse as a decoy. Evelyn accepted the sting of her mistake. She had treated a familiar vendor route as neutral because it existed outside the family hierarchy. She had not considered that ordinary civilians were easier to coerce than armed guards. I chose the route. Lewis is in greater danger because of me. You identified the weakness before it trapped us, Dante said, after Marco identified it first. Then adapt. The blunt faith in that command affected her more than comfort would have. She studied a printed utility map taped to the bakery wall. The two buildings shared an old stormwater pumping station beside the river. But there was no connecting passage. A maintenance catwalk ran above the flood barrier, exposed to wind and visible from lane 14. Entering there would be reckless unless the warehouse lights failed. Dante called the Bellandi underboss, Raphael Bellandi, directly. Raphael answered with outrage, insisting his men had arrived early because Marco warned that Dante planned to betray the truce. Dante did not accuse Marco. He asked one precise question. Had Raphael authorized anyone to open the sealed crates before the formal count? Raphael said no. Under the truce, a broken seal would make the shipment Moretti property again and expose whoever opened it to punishment from both families. Marco needs the crates moved, but he cannot open them publicly. Evelyn said after the call, Lewis saw something before they were sealed. That is why he matters. The decoy entered at 12:09 a.m. Marco's men surrounded it. At Nico's signal, a Moretti electrician interrupted non-essential lighting for 90 seconds, while exits and sprinklers remained powered. Dante and Evelyn crossed the flood catwalk in darkness. Wind shoved rain beneath Evelyn's hood and made the metal tremble. Dante kept one hand at her back without pushing, matching his pace to hers. Halfway across, her heel caught in the grating. She pulled free, leaving the shoe behind, and continued barefoot on one side rather than waste time. They entered through the pumping station access door, using a maintenance key Nico had delivered to the bakery. Inside, emergency lights painted the warehouse in dim red bars. Lane 14 lay beyond stacked pallets. Dante moved ahead, silent and controlled. Evelyn stayed close enough to see him, but not so close that a single burst of gunfire could reach them both. They found Lewis tied to a chair in an empty refrigeration office. No guard remained. A pressure plate beneath the chair, connected to a handheld alarm, taped under the desk, not an explosive, but a warning device that would signal if he stood. Dante disabled it by sliding a pallet shim beneath the plate while Evelyn cut the tape binding Lewis' mouth. Crate 27, Lewis gasped. False floor, Vittorio's ledger is inside. Lewis had seen Marco remove the red ledger and hide it beneath crate 27, whose Bellandi seal prevented inspection. Beside the ledger were Moretti bonds and records of bribes to 3 captains. After the shipment crossed the river, Marco would blame Dante for the loss and demand a succession. Vote at 10. Evelyn photographed Louis' bruises and recorded his account on the prepaid phone. But testimony under captivity would not be enough. They needed the crate before it crossed into Bellandi custody. Footsteps approached. Dante moved beside the door. Evelyn whispered to Louis that the lights would return soon. When they did, she would trigger the alarm deliberately, while Dante opened the adjacent service shutter. The noise would draw guards into the office as Nico's men came through the shutter. The lights snapped on. Evelyn lifted Louis' chair. The alarm screamed. 2 gunmen rushed in. Dante struck the first man's wrist against the frame and drove the second into the wall before either fired cleanly. A bullet tore through Dante's maintenance jacket and grazed his left side. He did not fall, but blood darkened his shirt. Nico's men breached the service shutter seconds later and secured the lane. Marco was not there. Crate 27 was already attached to a forklift, moving toward the Bellandi loading line. Evelyn ran not with impossible speed, but with desperate purpose toward the overhead control station. Her bare foot slipped once on wet concrete. She caught the rail, climbed the short stairs, and hit the red emergency stop that froze every powered loading gate. The forklift halted 10 feet from the custody line. Raphael Bellandi entered from the opposite gate with 6 men. He saw Moretti's soldiers aiming across the lane, Dante bleeding, and the disputed crate trapped between them. One more step, Raphael said, and the truce ends here. Dante pressed one hand against his bleeding side and lowered his pistol first. The gesture was not surrender. It was a reminder that restraint had to begin with the man who possessed the most reason to shoot. The seal on crate 27 is false, he told Raphael. Your mark is authentic, but your office did not apply it. Raphael kept his weapon raised. Marco said you would invent a defect. Then let your sealmaster inspect it. Under the truce rules, neither family could touch a disputed crate until one representative from each side witnessed the inspection. Evelyn descended from the control station, one shoe missing and rainwater streaking her legs. Dante's gaze dropped briefly to her bleeding heel, then returned to Raphael. He did not tell her to retreat because doing so in front of both families would weaken her authority under Vittorio's will. Raphael summoned his sealmaster. Nico represented the Morettis. The Belandi technician examined the wax, wire, and stamped lead disc. The components were genuine, but microscopic scratches around the crimp showed that the disc had been opened and pressed shut again with a hand tool. Raphael's anger shifted direction. Who had our seals? He asked. His nephew Paolo, assigned to the truce office, began backing toward the gate. Marco's men opened fire from the upper walkway before anyone could stop him. The first shots shattered lights rather than striking people, creating confusion. Dante pulled Evelyn behind a concrete barrier and covered Lewis while Nico returned fire toward the walkway. Raphael's men seized Paolo, who screamed that Marco had promised him control of the river routes. The exchange lasted less than a minute. One gunman was wounded. The others escaped through an unlocked roof door. Dr. Park confirmed Dante's graze was shallow, closed it, and ordered him to avoid twisting. She bandaged Evelyn's heel, and Evelyn took work boots from the supply cabinet. In the presence of both families, the sealmaster opened crate 27. Beneath a layer of rifles listed in the truce inventory lay a false plywood floor. The cavity below was empty. Lewis insisted the ledger had been there at 8, a dust outline, and torn red leather proved concealment, but not who removed the assets. Raphael suspended the transfer until noon and placed his own guards beside every crate. It was a costly concession because delay made him appear weak to his family, but Paolo's participation gave him reason to cooperate. He allowed the Morettis to take Lewis home under joint escort. Paolo remained Belandi custody and would testify only after Raphael determined whether his betrayal reached further. At 2:18 a.m., they returned to the mansion. Samuel was stable. Marco and his sons were gone, their garage empty and phones disconnected. Dante took Evelyn into his office. Dr. Park had replaced his bloodied shirt with a plain black one from the mansion wardrobe, leaving the collar open around his neck tattoos. Evelyn still wore the navy dress beneath the borrowed raincoat and the warehouse boots. Exhaustion had softened the careful control of her face. You saved the shipment, Dante said. I stopped a forklift. We still lost the ledger. You also returned for Lewis when you could have left New York. I gave him my word. He looked at her with the same intensity he had once brought to that elevator, but now anger and attraction were joined by shame. Did you know my father before you worked here? Evelyn sat because her heel throbbed. When I was 9, my father kept books for a small transport company in Queens. He discovered money being removed from pension accounts. Vittorio visited our apartment twice. A month later, my father died in what police called a robbery. You believe a Moretti killed him. Vittorio believed it. He paid for my education through an anonymous trust. Years later, he offered me the position beside you because I was good at operations, and because the pattern he saw in those old accounts had returned. He never named the person, he said. Naming a suspect too early would make me see every fact through hatred. Dante absorbed the revelation without defending his family, and you accepted because you wanted revenge. At first, she did not look away. Then I learned you weren't the man I had imagined. You still watched me. I protected you, without trusting me. The truth of it hurt because both statements were correct. Evelyn had shielded Dante from bad meetings, false allies, and dangers he never saw, yet she had denied him the choice to share the deepest danger. He stepped closer. That night in the elevator, was that part of your task? No. Her answer came without hesitation. That was the reason I nearly resigned. His hand lifted as though he might touch her cheek, then stopped. Trust could not be restored by desire. He lowered it. Samuel called them upstairs. His bank vault duplicate could be opened at 10, only with Samuel's signature and Evelyn's new trust authority. It contained Vittorio's original review notes, not the missing ledger. If Marco controlled enough captains, he could call the emergency succession vote at the same hour and remove Dante before they reached the bank. Then Nico entered carrying a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was the missing envelope from the council room. It had been found in Dante's private bedroom, beneath the pillow on the side where he never slept. Only 3 people possessed keys to that room: Dante, Evelyn, and Nico. Nico placed his key on the desk before Dante could ask. "Search me, my rooms, every account I own." Dante did not reach for the key. Loyalty between them was older than any security system. But he had already learned what unquestioned loyalty could hide. He ordered 2 guards from outside Nico's command to secure the bedroom and preserve the envelope exactly where it had been found. Dr. Park remained with Samuel. Evelyn waited in the office, aware that her own key made her equally suspect. "Mine is in my handbag," she said. "The bag was taken when I was detained." Nico checked the property cabinet. The handbag remained sealed, and Evelyn's key was inside. Dante's key had never left the chain in his pocket. Nico's was in his hand. The locked room had not been opened by a key. Evelyn remembered the mansion renovation completed 8 months earlier. Marco had argued that the aging climate system required new service ducts through the private floor. She had managed contractor schedules, but had been denied access to architectural drawings labeled as family security. That denial had seemed normal at the time. Now it looked deliberate. At 3:04 a.m., disturbed dust led them to an air grill above Dante's bookcase. Its service cavity allowed a grabber tool to lower the envelope from a mechanical closet in the guest corridor. Inside that closet, they found the grabber, disposable gloves, and a smear of red leather on a metal edge. Someone had used the same route to plant the envelope and had recently handled the missing ledger. More important, the closet lock showed no damage. The building engineer, Thomas Vale, controlled the service keys. Thomas was found dead at 3:40 in a suicide staged with a family pistol. Investigators found train tickets for his wife and daughter and a voicemail saying he had earned enough to send them away. He had taken Marco's money, though his full knowledge remained uncertain. Evelyn refused to chase Thomas' innocent family. His access connected Marco's renovation to the planted envelope, but did not prove the ledger theft or bribery. At 5 a.m., Samuel S. assistant arrived with corporate records showing that the contractor paid for the renovation, shared an address with a transport company, dissolved 23 years earlier, the company where Evelyn S.'s father had kept books. That was the first decisive bridge between the old murder and the present scheme. Vittorio had traced both to a holding company controlled through Marco's longtime accountant, Gerald Voss. Dante read the documents twice. "My father suspected Marco for 23 years and kept him beside us." Samuel, pale from blood loss but lucid, answered from the medical bed. "Suspicion is not proof." Vittorio also feared that an open accusation would split the family and start a war while you were still a boy. He spent too long believing he could contain his brother. Dante turned away. His wrong decision had been similar. He had allowed Marco control of the warehouse captains because removing an uncle after Vittorio's death might look like fear. Pride disguised as stability had given Marco the mechanism to strike. They had 5 hours before the bank appointment and the succession vote. Dante proposed arresting Marco immediately. Evelyn objected. Marco was already hidden. His sons controlled armed crews, and 3 captains could claim Dante was purging rivals to avoid lawful review. Force would confirm the story Marco wanted. "Then what do you propose?" Dante asked. "Use the will. I suspend certification until noon. You attend the council and make Marco show his votes. Nico and Samuel go to the bank. I find Gerald Voss. Alone? With one person Voss does not know serves us." She chose Sophia Moretti, Dante 58-year-old mother. Sophia appeared ornamental at family events, elegant and quiet. But she had managed Vittorio's illegitimate charities for 30 years and knew every accountant who had ever begged for her signature. She also possessed a moral authority Marco underestimated. Dante opposed putting his mother at risk. Sophia ended the argument. Herself, your father protected me by leaving me ignorant until ignorance became a cage. I will not let you repeat his mistake. Before they separated, Dante drew Evelyn aside. Dawn colored the office windows gray. He removed the termination letter from the table, tore it once, and placed the pieces in the fireplace without ceremony. That does not restore your position, he said. It restores your choice. Walk away now, and the trust will still protect you. Evelyn studied the man who had humiliated her, then changed course when facts required it. I'm not staying because I work for you, I know, and if we survive this, you do not get to decide what I become next. Something warm and restrained moved through his eyes, agreed. At 6:12 a.m., Evelyn and Sophia left in an unmarked sedan driven by a charity employee outside the Mafia chain. They reached Voss Brownstone in Queens. 40 minutes later, the front door stood open. Inside, the accountant's office had been emptied, but a kettle was still warm. On the bare desk lay the red ledger. Beside it sat a photograph of Evelyn, leaving St. Brigid's Church and a note in Marco's handwriting. Bring the trust key to your father's grave at 9 or Sophia dies. Sophia read the note over Evelyn's shoulder and gave a humorless smile. He has always mistaken women for objects that can be moved across a table. The threat was impossible on its face because Sophia stood unharmed. That was precisely why it worked. Marco did not need to possess her yet. He needed them to imagine that every route home was controlled and that he could take her before 9. The photograph of St. Brigid's proved his surveillance had followed Evelyn earlier. The red ledger on the desk might be genuine, altered, or bait, designed to place stolen evidence in her hands. Did not touch it. She photographed the room from the doorway and called Dante on the prepaid line. He wanted to send men immediately. Sophia refused to be extracted by a Moretti convoy, which would reveal her location and turn the quiet street into a battlefield. Marco expects panic, Evelyn said. Give him routine. The driver took Sophia through the rear alley in Evelyn's raincoat, while a similar-looking investigator left through the front, dividing any surveillance. Once Sophia was moving to a charity-safe apartment. Evelyn examined the ledger without relocating it. Early pages linked the old transport company to Marco's contractor. Later pages listed current bribes. 16 leaves documenting the bond had been cut out, leaving hostile lawyer's room. Evelyn found no trust key because the phrase referred not to a physical object, but to her certification authority. Marco wanted her written approval before the council vote. If she refused, he intended to use Sophia's apparent abduction to force Dante into violence. At 7:35, Dante arrived with one vehicle and 2 guards after ensuring he was not followed. His side wound pulled when he bent and Dr. Park's adhesive dressing had begun to stain. Evelyn made him sit while she reinforced the bandage with supplies from the car. "You are not my assistant anymore," he said as she worked. Then stopped making appointments with bullets. The old ease between them surfaced for one breath and vanished beneath the urgency. Dante told her the council notice had arrived. Marco demanded a 10 o'clock vote at the Moretti Funeral Chapel, a neutral family site where all captains could enter armed. He accused Dante of endangering the truce, losing the family bonds, and hiding the woman responsible. Marco claimed he would produce proof that Evelyn had manipulated Vittorio while the old Don was medicated. Sophia remembered witnessing a document at St. Brigid's 3 years before Evelyn joined the family. Vittorio identified its beneficiary only as the surviving child of Daniel Hart. Samuel added Evelyn's legal name after separate verification, explaining the apparent date conflicted in the will. Marco will attack that. Samuel warned by phone. The bank copy contains the verification, but we still need to reach it at 10. Evelyn's plan failed when police closed the bridge after an abandoned Moretti vehicle blocked 2 lanes. The bank vault could not be reached by 10. Dante suggested a helicopter. Samuel rejected it. His doctor would not clear him to fly after the gunshot, and the bank required his living biometric confirmation in person. No technical trick could replace him. They adapted. Evelyn suspended the succession certification in writing until noon, citing armed interference with the trust review. Dante would attend the chapel and challenge Marco to hold his votes until the lawful deadline. Sophia would appear by secure live audio through Samuel S. Assistant, not video, so Marco could not identify her location. Evelyn would go to her father's grave at 9 with a decoy certification, because Marco's reaction might reveal where he kept the missing pages. Dante refused. He asked for you because he intends to kill you after you sign. He asked for me because he thinks you will trade the family to save me. Would he be wrong? The question stripped the room of strategy. Evelyn looked at his cold, controlled face and saw the truth he had not permitted himself to speak. Dante would sacrifice power for her, and Marco was counting on it. She stepped closer. If you come to the cemetery, you hand him the story he needs. Trust me where I can be useful. He rested his forehead briefly against hers, careful and silent. It was more intimate than the kiss they had denied themselves. Return to me by 10. Stay alive until I do at 8:42. Nico drove Evelyn toward Calvary Cemetery with the false certification inside a plain envelope. 2 discreet cars followed at a distance. As they approached the family plot, Evelyn received a call from Luis Ortega's wife. Luis had vanished again from the protected apartment, leaving voluntarily after a message promised to reveal who killed Evelyn's father. Marco had changed the leverage. He was waiting at Daniel Hart's grave, with Luis kneeling beside him, and the missing ledger pages burning in a metal basin. Evelyn saw the smoke before Nico stopped the car. Calvary Cemetery spread beneath a low grey sky, its wet stones arranged in long, silent rows. Marco stood 20 yards from Daniel Hart's grave beneath a black umbrella. Luis knelt beside the headstone with his hands tied. 2 gunmen watched the access road, and a third held a lighter over the last bundle of ledger pages. Nico's backup could not approach without crossing open ground. Evelyn understood Marco's arrangement at once. If gunfire began, the pages burned, and Luis died. She left her phone in the car because Marco would search for it, but she kept a small analog voice recorder inside the lining of her handbag. Recording a confession alone would not decide the succession, yet it could corroborate physical records if Marco spoke knowingly. She walked forward in the same navy dress, now wrinkled from the night, with work boots replacing her heels. Marco's mouth curled at the sight. Vittorio dressed you better when he sent you to spy. Vittorio never chose my clothes. No, only your life. Evelyn stopped outside the reach of his nearest gun. Let Luis go. I brought the certification. Marco gestured to the envelope. A guard retrieved it, checked for metal, and delivered it to him. Marco read the first page. The false document granted temporary certification, but required the bellwether assets to remain frozen until noon. He wanted full transfer, and his anger exposed the urgency of his plan. Sign the release, he said. Dante keeps his title. The old dock worker walks away, and you keep the bonds. Marco glanced toward the fire before he could stop himself. Evelyn followed the look. Some pages were burning, but the bundle closest to the basin remained tied with blue archival ribbon. He needed the originals for leverage over the bribed captains. Destroying all of them would erase his own protection. The bonds are already gone, he said. No, they were your guarantee. You moved them out of crate 27 because Paolo panicked, but you cannot cash them without Voss authorization. Odes. Voss ran because you killed Thomas Vale instead of protecting him. Now you need control of the trust warehouses to replace what you stole. Marco's calm cracked. Your father made the same mistake. He believed understanding numbers gave him power. Luis lifted his head. Evelyn did not react outwardly, though grief tightened every muscle. Did you kill him? I offered him a life in Florida. He copied books that belonged to us and took them to Vittorio. A robbery was kinder than the example my partners wanted, and now you repeat it with the captain's money. I correct a family mistake. Vittorio chose a son who lets a secretary delay a blood treaty. Dante feels too much and hides it behind that dead face. You are proof. Marco ordered her to sign. Evelyn opened her handbag slowly and removed a pen. The recorder remained concealed. She asked to see Luis hands-free first. Marco agreed to one wrist, confident that the older man could not run across wet ground as the guard bent to cut the binding. Luis drove his shoulder into the man's knees. Evelyn threw the uncapped pen at the gunman, holding the lighter. It did no harm, but his reflexive turn gave Nico the moment he needed. A suppressed shot from the road struck the metal basin, overturning it onto wet grass. The bundled pages slid clear of the flame. Gunfire broke across the cemetery. Evelyn dropped behind her father's stone and pulled Lewis with her. A bullet chipped granite above them. Marco's guards fired toward Nico's position, allowing Marco to seize the pages and run toward a waiting car. Evelyn saw that the blue ribbon had snagged on the basin S handle. Several pages tore free and remained in the grass. Louis tried to rise, but pain in his bruised knee stopped him. Evelyn could chase the pages or help him. She chose Louis, dragging him behind a larger monument while Nico's team advanced. The choice cost them Marco, whose car broke through a maintenance gate and escaped. It also preserved the witness, who could authenticate the warehouse records when the shooting stopped. One guard was wounded and captured. The others had fled. Evelyn recovered 5 original pages from the grass. They documented payments to Gerald Voss, the purchase of the bearer bonds, and a transfer authorization bearing Marco's genuine signature. A partial page listed the 3 captains' code names, but not their legal names. Nico found the recorder intact. Evelyn listened Marco's admission once. Confirmation left a quiet emptiness where uncertainty had lived. At 9:31, they drove toward the funeral chapel. Louis' knee was swollen but stable, and a medic rode with him. Dante called from the chapel basement. Marco had arrived ahead of them through another gate and claimed Evelyn tried to assassinate him. 2 captains had already shifted their votes. I have his signature and his voice, Evelyn said. Bring them to Samuel. Not here, Dante replied. The council is not a court. Marco's men will call both fabricated. He was right. Vittorio's bank records could authenticate the payments independently, while Bellandi's custody of Paolo could corroborate the false seal. The 3 strands together mattered. No single convenient object would solve everything. Then Raffaele Bellandi called. Paolo had been murdered inside Bellandi's custody by a guard whose family Marco held in debt. Before dying, Paolo revealed that the bearer bonds were not with Voss. Marco had hidden them beneath the altar of the Moretti funeral chapel, the building where the succession vote was already beginning. The chapel belonged to no individual Moretti and was neutral ground. Searching beneath its altar could turn neutral captains against Dante. Marco had made the discovery appear to violate family tradition. Dante stood before the council while pain pulled at his bandaged side. He wore a clean, midnight blue suit supplied from the chapel office, with an open collar, black shirt that left the fixed ink on his neck visible. Marco faced him across the aisle, one sleeve torn from the cemetery escape, presenting himself as the survivor of an assassination. Evelyn Hart has corrupted the Bellwether Trust, stolen family records, and manipulated my brother's failing mind, Marco told the captains. Dante chose her over the blood agreement that keeps your children safe. Dante did not deny choosing her. This vote was called before the review deadline and under armed interference. Any result is invalid until noon. A don who needs a secretary's permission is no. At 10:02, Evelyn arrived through the side entrance with Louis and Nico. She did not march to Dante's side. Instead, she went to Samuel, who had reached the chapel after police reopened one bridge lane. His injured arm remained in a sling, and Dr. Park had forbidden him to stay longer than an hour. The bank appointment had been moved to a secure branch 3 blocks away, but Marco's emergency vote was already underway. Evelyn gave Samuel the recovered ledger pages and the recorder. Samuel examined the signature and paper, but refused to claim instant authentication. We need the bank comparison. Marco demanded that Evelyn surrender the trust authority. She stepped into the aisle and addressed the captains directly. I will certify any lawful successor at noon. Until then, no Bellwether warehouse changes hands. If you vote now, you are voting without the assets. Marco promised you. The coded captains reacted. One looked toward the altar. It was a small movement, but Dante saw it. So did Marco. Marco drew his pistol and fired at the ceiling. Dust fell from the painted saints. His sons locked the chapel doors, while armed loyalists rose among the mourners' pews. The succession process became what Marco had planned from the beginning. Coercion wearing the clothes of tradition. "Sign," he ordered Evelyn, "or I bury Dante where his father lies." Dante's men reached for weapons, but Marco's shooters occupied the balcony and held advantage. A firefight would kill captains whose allegiance remained undisputed. Dante ordered his people not to fire. Evelyn looked at the altar. The bonds were hidden, but exposing them required more than announcing Paolo's last words. She remembered organizing Vittorio's funeral 6 weeks earlier. The altar platform had been opened to repair a loose floorboard. Church custodian Mei Chen had signed the maintenance invoice and photographed the completed work for insurance. If the platform had been opened again, the new screws heads would not match her photographs. Mei was in the rear pew, invited because Vittorio had treated staff as family. Evelyn caught her eye and asked, calmly, "Were those altar screws brass when you finished the repair?" Mei stared at the platform, brass and slotted. "Those are steel Phillips heads." The observation gave neutral captains reason to demand inspection. Joseph Carbone invoked the rule requiring the custodian and 2 blood representatives to inspect any alteration. Marco could kill Joseph and reveal tyranny, or allow the inspection and risk the bonds. His fatal constraint was the tradition he had used as cover. He chose force. The rule yields during succession. "No," Sophia Moretti said from the balcony stairs. She had left the safe apartment after realizing Marco's attention was fixed on the chapel. Accompanied by Raphael Bellandi and 4 unarmed witnesses, she entered through the choir passage known to funeral staff. Raphael carried Paolo's recorded statement, made hours earlier during questioning, admitting that Marco supplied the false seal and ordered the hidden compartment. Marco swung his weapon towards Sophia. Dante moved before thought, crossing the aisle despite his wound and placing himself between them. Marco fired. The bullet struck Dante's upper left arm, spinning him to one knee. Nico's men used the instant of shock to seize the balcony shooters, while Raphael's witnesses blocked the choir exit. Marco grabbed Evelyn by the back of her dress and dragged her against him, pistol at her ribs. Dante began to rise. "Stay down," Evelyn said, not in surrender, but as a command he had taught her to trust. She drove the heel of her work boot onto Marco's instep and dropped her full weight suddenly, rather than trying to overpower his arms. His grip loosened. Sophia struck his gun hand with Vittorio's heavy wooden cane, which she used for a recent knee injury and had carried openly into the chapel. The pistol fell. Evelyn kicked it beneath a pew, and Nico arrested Marco before Dante's men could execute him. Mei opened the altar platform under witness. Inside were the bearer bonds, the remaining ledger pages, and Gerald Voss' authorization device. The council captains saw their own names beside Marco's payments. Yet the victory carried a final threat. Marco smiled from the floor and told Dante, "Arrest me, and every Bellandi route gets the evidence that your father ordered Daniel Hart's death." Evelyn turned toward Samuel. The old lawyer's face told her that part of Marco's claim might be true. Dr. Park stabilized Dante in the chapel sacristy. The bullet had passed through muscle of his upper arm without breaking bone, but blood loss from 2 wounds and a sleepless night left him pale. He remained seated while Nico secured Marco and separated the 3 bribed captains. Raphael Bellandi placed Paolo's statement with Samuel, ensuring that a rival family, not Dante's own men, held an independent copy. Evelyn stood beside Vittorio's coffin alcove, while Samuel told her the truth. 23-year-old Hart had copied records proving Marco stole pension funds with 2 outside partners. Vittorio promised to protect him, then ordered him moved secretly to a safe apartment. Vittorio's soldiers staged a public argument with Daniel to make Marco believe the bookkeeper had been rejected. The plan failed. One of Vittorio's soldiers sold the safe address to Marco. Daniel was killed before the move was complete. Vittorio did not order the murder, but afterward he killed the traitorous soldier without trial and concealed the entire operation from police. Marco possessed a recording of Vittorio, authorizing the secret removal. Edited, it could sound like a death order. Unedited, it still proved kidnapping, obstruction, and unlawful execution after Daniel's murder. Vittorio protected the family name instead of giving your father justice, Samuel said. The trust was his attempt to return what his silence stole from you. Evelyn felt grief change shape again. Vittorio had been neither the murderer Marco described, nor the blameless protector she had wanted to believe in. He had saved her education, employed her for her ability, and placed power in her hands. He had also denied her father a lawful truth to preserve the Moretti empire. Marco offered a bargain from the front pew. If Dante released him with one warehouse and safe passage, he would surrender every copy of Vittorio's recording and name the outside partners who participated in Daniel's murder. Several captains urged acceptance. Public exposure could invite federal cases, destroy the truce, and stain Vittorio's memory. Dante asked Evelyn to come into the aisle. He could barely lift his injured arm, yet his voice carried through the chapel. The decision belongs to you. It would have been easy for him to hide behind her authority or ask her to save his father's reputation. Instead, he surrendered the choice most dangerous to his power. No, Evelyn said to Marco, you do not purchase freedom with a truth you stole. Marco laughed. Then you destroy the man you claim love. The word landed publicly. But Evelyn did not retreat from it. If Dante's powers survives only through mine, it is not a life I will share. Dante met her eyes release everything. Samuel transferred Vittorio's notes, Marco's ledger, Paolo's statement, and the unedited recording to the federal attorney designated in the trust. Raphael retained his copy, while May and Joseph signed the altar inventory. Marco's bravado faded when Voss entered. Under federal escort, seeking protection after Thomas Vale's death, he provided the codes connecting Marco to the bonds and admitted planting the altered ledger. Federal agents arrested Marco while prosecutors separately reviewed Vittorio's crimes. Nico surrendered the pistol found with Thomas Vale. The bribed captain lost command. One confessed. The council reconvened unarmed. At 11:38, Evelyn read Vittorio's condition. The successor must accept independent warehouse oversight and renounce retaliation against cooperating witnesses. Dante accepted without bargaining. He also surrendered the West Warehouse for joint civilian administration until every truce shipment could be audited. Raphael agreed to extend the ceasefire for 30 days because exposing Paolo's role had prevented Belandi weapons from being used as cover for theft. At noon, Evelyn certified Dante as successor not because Vittorio asked, and not because she loved him, but because his costly choice demonstrated that he could rule without making truth subordinate to blood. After receiving the oaths, Dante ordered compensation for Thomas Vale's family, protection for Louis, and disclosure to the families of the 3 dead warehouse men. Only afterward did he allow Dr. Park to take him to the hospital. Evelyn rode in the ambulance, but sat across from him rather than holding his uninjured hand. Their danger had ended. The harder choice remained. You fired me because evidence pointed toward me, she said, but you humiliated me before asking why. I cannot return to the same place and pretend the will fixed that. I know and I cannot build a life inside another man's secret plan. Even Vittorio's Dante looked at her steadily. Then choose a life that is yours if there is room in it for me. I will come without a title. For the first time since the council meeting, Evelyn allowed herself to touch him. She placed 2 fingers against his uninjured wrist, feeling the proof of life beneath the ink. Recover first, she said. Then we discuss terms. 6 months later, the West Warehouse reopened independently. The truce held. Marco awaited trial while Voss cooperated. Daniel Hart's surviving killer was charged, and Vittorio's crimes became public despite family objections. Thomas Vale's family received restitution. Luis retired and became a warehouse safety advisor, though he still avoided refrigeration rooms. Samuel recovered most movement in his arm. Evelyn did not return as Dante's assistant. When the trust expired, she accepted only restitution owed to Daniel's estate and directed the remainder into an independent worker protection foundation. She became chief operating officer of the legitimate consortium appointed by its independent board. Her gift remained coordination under pressure and seeing the human routines powerful men ignored. In jewel-toned dresses and practical warehouse shoes, she used it openly. Men who underestimated her revealed what they had failed to prepare. Dante recovered after surgery and rehabilitation. Though his side scar tightened in cold weather, his tattoos and restrained expression remained. Accountability made his power deliberate. He courted Evelyn without guards, binding gifts or claims on her time. Their first dinner was at a Queen's restaurant Daniel had loved. Their second ended in an argument. Their third ended with the kiss they had postponed for 2 years, slow and chosen. They did not hide their relationship. He apologized privately. She admitted that protection without truth denied him agency. Trust grew through ordinary proof and honest disagreement. On the anniversary of Vittorio's death, the family gathered at St. Bridges for a memorial. Evelyn almost refused to attend. Vittorio's legacy remained complicated, and gratitude could not cancel anger. She went because choosing to remember honestly was different from offering absolution. After the service, Samuel gave her a final letter that had been held until all investigations closed. Vittorio wrote that he had placed too much responsibility on a young woman already carrying the cost of his failures. He did not ask her to protect Dante forever. He asked her to expose any system that required good people to become silent in order to survive. At the bottom he had written, "Do not inherit our fear." Evelyn folded the letter and inside her handbag. She did not give it to Dante, because it belonged first to her. Outside the church, he waited beneath the stone arch in a tailored black coat, hands empty, rain silvering his swept-back hair. 2 security men remained discreetly across the street, far enough to give them privacy. Was it another command? He asked. An apology.
A little?
Dante nodded, accepting that some wounds closed through inches rather than miracles. They walked toward the cemetery where Daniel Hart now had a new marker, bearing the truth of his life. Loving father, honest bookkeeper, witness who refused to be bought, at the grave. Dante placed no family emblem and made no speech. He stood beside Evelyn while she laid white roses against the stone. When she rose, he offered his hand but did not take hers until she chose to place her fingers in it. The board approved the harbor expansion, she told him as they walked. With my amendment. Without it, you rejected my amendment. It gave your office too much appointment power. His eyes narrowed with the familiar cold focus that once frightened rooms into obedience. Now she recognized the faint warmth beneath it. Dinner tonight. You can explain your reasoning. That sounds like a meeting. Dinner first. Argument afterward, she smiled. Better. At the cemetery gate, reporters waited to ask whether Evelyn Hart would become the new Donna of the Moretti family. Dante stopped, prepared to shield her from the cameras. Evelyn stepped forward before he could. "I am not an inheritance," she said. "I am not a reward for a man who made one good decision. I lead the consortium, and I choose whom I love. Those are separate facts," a reporter asked Dante whether that answer embarrassed him. "No," he said. His hand remained open at his side. "It is the reason I trust her." Evelyn took that hand only after the cameras captured that he had not reached first. Together they walked into the rain not as boss and assistant, protector and assignment, or heirs to Vittorio's unfinished plan, but as 2 people who had chosen truth at a cost and then chosen each other without debt.